Hi everyone, it's William with the 1921 Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series, and we are up to the final section, part 7 of the long diary entry of the 31st of March 1921. So it wasn't really that long. The last long entry was twice as long. I had to divide it into actually 14 parts, maybe more. I don't remember exactly. All right, so I like this new one. It's pretty straightforward. It's an easy one. I am more bewildered than ever about what Dmitri was talking about in his writing about being more or less ripped apart in the press. The emigre press and the French press, and maybe it's true in the French press, but I've gone through both February and March in the Общая дело and Последние новости emigre newspapers, and I haven't found a single mention of him. Of course, there's always the possibility that I've overlooked something, and I hope I have, because they're hard to read. The print, even when you enlarge it as much as you can without just losing it completely, is still small, and so small and blurry that it's difficult to read. But I've done my best to go over it with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm really mystified by this one. There are sections where there are missing parts. Apparently, even though this is an official institution in Russia, it's a state historical library, they still weren't able to obtain pristine copies of these journals. So, for instance, in one of the issues of the Общая дело, the whole bottom half of a page is missing. So actually 2 pages, because on both the one side and the other. And so, you know, I guess it's possible that someone was looking for these sections that concerned, if not Dmitri in particular, then the Romanovs and what they were doing in the immigration, and that's why that text isn't there. I have to assume that that's the case, because what else could it be? You know, Dmitri would not have simply come up with all of this in his head as an imaginary thing. He wasn't a mentally ill person, so yeah, I don't know. I will persevere. I'll go on to April, and yeah, just keep going and hoping to turn up something, if not about the Berlin trip, then something else about him. Okay, so to recap, the previous diary section was about General Wrangel and this huge pressing crisis with the remnants of his volunteer army being kicked out of Constantinople and having all their funding and source of supplies, food, you name it, rescinded by the French government that had been supporting them, and what to do about that. And you know, Dmitri gives it its due. He talks about it at some length, but rather unlike him, he doesn't express an opinion about what should be done. You know, I think he and everybody else just didn't know how this could be dealt with. So what he does express an opinion about is, well, he just laments that Wrangel didn't see it coming enough to make some kind of preparations in advance, although I'm not sure, you know, what Wrangel could have done. Anyway, the cast that we have today, the cast of characters, we have 2 people. Charles I, who was the Emperor of Austria-Hungary before, or the last one, and Nicholas Horthy, who was the, what would you call him, sort of the regent or the prime minister, I'm not sure, but at any rate, he headed the government in Hungary. Okay, so that is the topic today, what is going on in Hungary. And that, if you recall, that also raised some hopes, at least among the monarchists in Berlin, that they could have some kind of alliance with Hungary and with the Hungarian crown. Okay, here we go. In addition to the Wrangel tragedy, there's one other issue that's attracting general attention, and that's what's happening now in Hungary. Apparently, the king made an attempt to return. Naturally, it didn't succeed because the representatives of the Entente wouldn't allow the return of a Habsburg, beyond which all monarchical experiments immediately provoked the most active resistance from Western Europe. But despite the fact that the king couldn't hold out, despite the fact that he was forced to go back to Switzerland, the Hungarians have been surprisingly tactful in relation to all this, and even sent a note to the Swiss government saying that even though the king is not seated on the Hungarian throne, he is nonetheless the legitimate monarch, and asking the Swiss government to treat him accordingly. Naturally, the English, and especially the French press, mocked the whole affair, not bothering to conceal their conviction that the Entente will never allow the return of the monarchy to Hungary. But apparently old Horthy continues to guard the crown of St. Stephen with great care. And now I will complete my entries with a short description of what I've been doing lately. Excuse me. Alas, exclamation point, but not much of it is interesting. Well, I beg to differ with that. But anyway, here we go. So, this sheds some light for me on why the Russian monarchists, whether they were constitutional monarchists who favored the Entente or whether they were, people who wanted to see an autocrat come back, why they held this grudge against the Entente. After all, they'd been allies during the war, and Germany had been the enemy, and Germany, after all, didn't have a monarchy anymore either. But they had the feeling that since the victorious countries, the Entente, were in control, and since they were determined not to see the reemergence of the pre-war monarchical order in Europe, they were thus, to some extent, not, I hesitate to say the enemy, but the enemy of monarchy, even though there were plenty of monarchies left in Europe, and Britain itself was a monarchy. Still, I think it's true, the Entente didn't want to see these monarchies come back, because the ones in Central and Eastern Europe and in Russia, of course, had been more authoritarian than the ones in the West, and they didn't want to see that. They linked that with the aggression, as they saw it, that had brought about the First World War. So, this is one of the reasons why Dmitri, even though he was a moderate, and other Russian monarchists had this kind of grudge against the members of the Entente. Okay, as for Nicholas Horthy, now I could be wrong because honestly, I just read a few things online and I didn't go into detail, but the impression I got is that Horthy, although he was ostensibly in favor of the return of the king and was holding the throne for him and was guarding, as Dmitri says, guarding the crown of St. Stephen, that the fact of the matter was that he did not want the king to return. He wasn't really a champion of the king. He liked the position that he had and he wanted to keep it. So it kind of reminds me, for those of you who are like me, who are nerds, the situation in The Lord of the Rings where you had a king. I can't even remember. I'm not that big of a nerd. I can't even remember the name of the kingdom. But the king having been absent for at least a generation or two, one, I think. the keeper of the throne had decided, yeah, just like Horty, I like this. I don't want the king back. Anyway, that was a useless reference, but I think, Dmitri and others were misinformed about what Horty really wanted. Apparently, again, correct me if you're wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, don't correct me if you're wrong, but if I'm wrong, correct me. Okay, and Shandor, if you're watching this, definitely let me know what you think. Okay, so the next question is, what exactly does Dmitri find or think that future readers are going to find interesting in his diaries? Because here he is telling us that this elopement almost with Coco, that's not going to be very interesting. And the fact of the matter is, it is, of course, very interesting. So it does make me wonder, what does he think? Does he think it's mainly going to be the historical content and talking about things like this with Hungary and with Wrangel and that sort of thing? Or, what does he think is going to be interesting? However he comes down on that, it doesn't seem to make a difference in what he's writing. He's writing about what's happening to him and around him, whether he thinks it's going to be interesting or not. And he doesn't stint on, on the detail in these Coco entries that are to come. So in fact, in the very next video, we're going to be starting with the short diary entries that describe his daily life as usual. And the very first one of them, the 16th of March, starts us off with a fascinating outing that he takes with Coco. It would really be perfect for, I'm writing a novel, I'm thinking in terms of my novel, but also a film. If you were even just doing a 2-hour film, this is a scene that you would include. And we're going to find him in a very different mood. This dark time that he was going through seems to have cleared up. The clouds moved off very quickly once he made his decision to go off with Coco. So, we'll find him in a very different mood. And let's see, today is the 12th of March, 2025, as I'm doing this. So we will be with Coco for Valentine's Day. Even though, it wasn't celebrated there and Dmitri doesn't mention it, it's still kind of nice for us, right, to have a day with Coco 2 days from now on Valentine's Day. So do come back for that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.